All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're digging into two incredibly important sections of India's criminal law. These were specifically designed to fight a type of crime that happens where no one can see it, behind the closed doors of a home. We're talking about the laws against cruelty and dowry death.
You know, this is a story that prosecutors hear way too often. A young woman dies under really suspicious circumstances in her husband's home. The official story? It was a tragic accident in the kitchen. But the reality is, the crime scene is the family home, and any real evidence has a habit of disappearing.
And that really gets to the heart of what we're talking about today. In the privacy of a home where you don't have CCTV cameras or outside witnesses, how does the legal system even start to figure out what really happened? Well, as we're about to see, the law has come up with some pretty unique and powerful ways to fight back.
So, to really get why these special laws even exist, you first have to understand the biggest problem in these cases: actually proving that what an accused person did directly led to the victim's death. It's not like a crime that happens out in public with a clear chain of events. And that's exactly why the standard laws for murder just weren't cutting it, and why these very specialized legal tools had to be created.
Okay, so the first tool in the legal toolbox is the offense of cruelty. You can find it in India's new criminal code, the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, which has taken the place of the old Indian Penal Code. And as you're about to see, what the law considers cruelty is way broader and more powerful than just physical violence.
Now, this is where the law gets really specific. It actually splits the definition of cruelty into two separate parts. On one side, you've got willful conduct. Think of acts that are so bad they could actually drive a woman to suicide or cause her serious harm either mentally or physically. And on the other side, you have harassment, which is tied directly to trying to force her or her family to hand over property. And you gotta pay attention to the wording here: unlawful demand. You might be thinking, why not just say dowry? Well, it's because this term was chosen on purpose to be much wider. Of course, it covers dowry, but it also covers demands for what's called sridahan. That's all the personal property and gifts a woman brings with her into the marriage. So any attempt to take her own jewelry or her own assets, that also counts as cruelty. It's a much bigger net.
Okay, so building on that, the law is also super specific about who can be charged with this crime and who legally counts as a victim. And believe me, it's not always as straightforward as you might think.
This is where it gets a little complicated, but this table lays it all out. See, the law targets the husband or a relative of the husband. But over the years, the courts have had to decide who that includes. And here's a fascinating one. A second wife can actually be considered an accused relative, and she can be considered a victim who can file her own case. But check this out. Live-in partners or a mistress? Nope. They fall outside the scope of this particular law. The focus is really tight on that marital relationship.
Now we get to the second and arguably even more powerful legal tool, the offense of dowry death. This law was literally created for one specific reason: to get around the almost impossible task of proving a murder case when the death happens inside the home. It's a special weapon for a very special kind of crime.
So instead of having to find that one smoking gun piece of evidence, the prosecution just has to prove these 4 key ingredients. It's almost like a recipe. First, the death has to be unnatural. Second, there's a strict time limit. It has to happen within 7 years of the marriage. Third, you have to show she was facing cruelty or harassment soon before her death. And finally, the fourth and crucial ingredient, that cruelty had to be all about a demand for dowry.
And about that 7-year time limit, it's not a suggestion, it is a hard and fast rule. The law basically recognizes that, statistically speaking, those first 7 years of marriage are when a bride is most vulnerable to this kind of harassment. If the death happens one day after that 7-year mark, you just can't use this specific law.
Now that phrase, soon before her death, can trip people up. It doesn't literally mean the day before she died. The courts have interpreted this to mean there has to be a live link, a clear, ongoing connection between the harassment over dowry and her eventual death. So even if the last specific act of cruelty happened months before, if the effect of that cruelty was continuous and ultimately led to her death, then the condition is met.
And this is where we get to the most powerful and honestly the most controversial part of the dowry death law. It's not just about defining a crime. It's about completely flipping the script on who has to prove what. And it does this through something called a legal presumption.
And this right here is the absolute game changer. Just look at the difference. In a normal murder trial, the prosecution has to prove a direct line that the accused's action, like pulling a trigger, caused the death.
But in a dowry death trial, once the prosecution proves those 4 ingredients we just talked about, boom, the law itself steps in. It presumes that the husband and his relatives are the ones who caused the death.
The key word here is deemed. It's like a legal shortcut. The court is basically told to assume the husband or his relatives are responsible. And just like that, the burden of proof completely shifts over to the accused. The law essentially says, look, given these circumstances, we believe you did it. Now it's your job to prove to us that you didn't.
So what's the big takeaway here? Well, it's that these laws aren't just words in a book. They are very specific, very practical tools that were created to solve a real-world problem. They're designed to pierce that veil of silence that so often surrounds the home and to create a way to hold people accountable, even when all the direct evidence is long gone.
And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. These laws are a really powerful solution to a hidden crime, but they also rely on this idea of a legal presumption, which totally changes how justice normally works. So, the question we're left with is this. When a crime is designed to be invisible, is a legal presumption sometimes the only way to bring the truth to light? Thanks for joining me.